I just wanted to see who he was without the suit. I didn't think he would hear me, and I definitely didn't think it would change my life. The first thing I noticed about the gala wasn't the music or the chandeliers. It was how everything felt just a little too perfect, like a movie set where I had accidentally wandered into the wrong scene. Crystal glasses clinked softly, people laughed in low, controlled tones, and every man in the room wore a suit that probably cost more than my rent for a year. I adjusted the strap of my simple black dress, the fabric suddenly feeling thinner under the weight of 100 invisible expectations. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really. I was just filling in for a coworker, carrying trays, smiling politely, blending into the background. That was the plan. Stay invisible. Stay safe. But then I saw him. Not directly, not at first. Just the way the room shifted. Conversations softened. People moved aside without being asked. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Power didn't need to announce itself. It simply arrived, and everything else adjusted. That's him, my friend whispered beside me, barely moving her lips. Alexander Romano. The name meant nothing to me. Just another rich man in a room full of them. I shrugged slightly, pretending I didn't care, even though curiosity pressed quietly against my ribs. He looks like every other guy here, I murmured, keeping my voice low, my eyes still focused on the tray in my hands. But then I made the mistake. I let my guard down for 1 second too long. I leaned closer, just enough that my words felt private, safe inside that small space between us. I just want to see him without his suit, I said, almost laughing under my breath. Just once. Then maybe I'd know who he really is. It was supposed to be nothing. A throwaway comment. A harmless thought spoken out loud. The kind of thing people say all the time and forget a second later. But the air changed. I didn't notice it right away. Not until the music seemed quieter. Not until the weight of something unseen pressed against the back of my neck. And then I turned. Slowly. Carelessly. Like it didn't matter. Like I wasn't about to realize. Something I couldn't undo. He was standing there. Not across the room. Not hidden in a crowd. Right behind me. Close enough that I could see the fine stitching on his suit. The way the fabric moved with him. The kind of detail you only notice when something, or someone, demands your attention without saying a word. His eyes met mine. And in that moment, I understood something I couldn't explain. He had heard me. Every word. But he didn't look angry. He didn't look amused either. That would have been easier. Instead, he looked interested. Like I had just become the most unexpected part of his night. My fingers tightened around the tray, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. I should have looked away. I should have apologized. I should have done anything normal. But I didn't. Because something about the way he was looking at me made it impossible to pretend this was just a mistake. And that was the moment I realized. I hadn't just spoken out loud. I had stepped into something I didn't understand. And he was already watching. I forgot how to breathe for a second, maybe longer, because when someone like him looks at you, it does not feel like attention. It feels like gravity, like something pulling you in whether you are ready or not. I lowered my eyes first, because that felt like the only safe thing to do, and suddenly the tray in my hands became the most important thing in the world, the glasses, the balance, the simple task of not dropping anything. I told myself to move, to step away, to act like nothing had happened, but my feet hesitated just long enough to betray me. He noticed. Of course he did. Men like him notice everything. Careful. A voice said, low and steady, close enough that I felt it more than heard it. I froze. It was not loud, not demanding, but it carried something that made the noise of the room fade into the background. I looked up again, slower this time, and he was still there, still watching me, his expression unreadable, like he was waiting for me to do something interesting. Or honest. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. I am fine, I said, though my voice came out softer than I intended, not quite steady. He did not respond right away. His eyes flicked briefly to the tray in my hands, then back to my face, like he was assessing something I could not see. You do not look fine, he said after a moment, not accusing, not concerned, just stating a fact. I let out a small breath that almost turned into a nervous laugh, but I stopped it before it could fully escape. It is just a busy night, I said, forcing a polite smile, the kind I had practiced 100 times in places like this. The kind that meant nothing. Something shifted in his gaze then, subtle but unmistakable, like he had just confirmed something he had suspected. Is that why you were analyzing strangers? He asked. My heart skipped. There it was. No anger. No sarcasm. Just precision. He had heard everything. There was no point pretending otherwise. I felt heat rise to my face, but I forced myself to hold his gaze this time, even though every instinct told me to look away. I was not analyzing, I said carefully. I was just talking. About me. It was not a question. I hesitated, then nodded once, because lying felt pointless under that kind of attention. Yes. The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to make my pulse quicken for reasons I did not want to examine. And what exactly were you hoping to see? He asked. The question hung between us, heavier than it should have been. I opened my mouth, then closed it again, suddenly aware of how ridiculous my words must have sounded now that they were no longer hidden. I did not mean anything by it. I said finally, quieter now. It was just a thought. He studied me for a long second, and I had the strange feeling that he could see past every careful answer, every polite layer I tried to hold in place. People usually mean more than they say, he replied. His voice did not change, but something in the way he said it made my chest tighten. Before I could respond, someone approached from behind him, speaking his name with quiet urgency. He did not turn immediately. His eyes stayed on mine for one last moment, like he was deciding something. Then, just before he stepped away, he said, "Be careful what you say out loud." And just like that, he was gone, swallowed back into the crowd, into the suits, into the world that had never been mine. But the space he left behind did not feel empty. It felt marked. I stood there for a second too long, my hands still steady around the tray, but everything else inside me slightly off balance. Because now I knew something I had not known before. I had not just been noticed. I had been remembered. I tried to tell myself it was over, that whatever had just happened was nothing more than an uncomfortable moment that would disappear into the noise of the night. But the problem was that the room no longer felt the same. It was subtle, almost impossible to explain, but once you notice something like that, you cannot unnotice it. I moved through the crowd again, offering drinks, smiling when expected, nodding at conversations I did not hear, but there was a weight now, something just beneath the surface of everything. Every time I passed a mirrored wall or a polished surface, I caught myself checking behind me, half expecting to see him again, standing too close, watching without saying a word. He did not appear, not immediately, and somehow that made it worse, because now it felt intentional, like absence could be a form of presence. "Lena, table 7, my manager called, snapping me out of my thoughts. I nodded quickly and adjusted my grip on the tray, forcing my focus back to something simple, something I could control. Table 7 was near the far side of the room, away from the main crowd, where conversations were quieter and the lighting was softer. I approached with practiced ease, setting down glasses, offering a polite smile, doing everything exactly the way I was supposed to. That was when I noticed it. A small shift in the atmosphere, the kind that does not announce itself, but makes people straighten slightly, makes voices lower without reason. I did not need to turn to know why, but I did anyway. Slowly, carelessly, like I had learned nothing. He was sitting there now, not standing, not moving through the room like before. Sitting at the head of the table, his posture relaxed in a way that did not feel casual at all. If anything, it felt more controlled, more deliberate. His suit was still perfect, every line sharp, every detail untouched by the chaos of the evening. But his attention was not on the people speaking to him. It was on me. Again, my steps slowed for half a second before I caught myself and continued forward, placing the last glass down with steady hands. "Anything else?" I asked, my voice even, professional, as if I had not been replaying his words in my head for the past 10 minutes. One of the men at the table started to respond, but Alexander lifted his hand slightly, not looking at him, just enough to stop the conversation without effort. The silence that followed was immediate. He leaned back in his chair just a fraction, his gaze never leaving mine. "Yes," he said. Just one word. Calm. Controlled. Final. I waited, because it felt like the only option. Because walking away now would have felt like running. And something told me that would be a mistake. "You can start by answering my question," he continued. My pulse quickened again, but I kept my expression neutral, the same polite mask I had been wearing all night. "I am not sure which question you mean," I said carefully. It was a weak attempt. I knew it. He knew it. The slight shift in his eyes told me as much. "The one you avoided," he said. No anger. No pressure. Just certainty. The men around him had gone quiet, their attention no longer on their drinks or their conversation, but on us. I became aware of every small detail all at once. The way my fingers curled slightly against the edge of the tray, the sound of distant music, the faint hum of voices from across the room. What was I hoping to see? I repeated, buying myself a second. He did not respond. He did not need to. I exhaled slowly, then met his gaze fully, because something in me refused to back down completely, even now. Someone real, I said. The words came out softer than I expected, but they were honest. More honest than I had planned to be. For a moment, nothing happened. No reaction. No change. And then, almost imperceptibly, something in his expression shifted. Not softer, not warmer, but different. Like I had just crossed a line I did not know existed. Careful, he said quietly. That is a dangerous expectation. And in that moment, I realized this was no longer just a conversation. It was the beginning of something I did not understand, something I could not walk away from as easily as I should have. The words stayed between us longer than they should have, like they had weight, like they meant more here than they ever would have anywhere else. And for a second I wondered if I had just said the wrong thing again, if I had stepped too far into a space that was not mine to enter. I should have walked away. That was the simple answer. Finish the service, keep my head down, forget his face, forget his voice, forget the way he looked at me like I was something unexpected in a room where nothing was supposed to be unexpected. But I did not move. Neither did he. Most people do not ask for real, he said after a moment, his tone still calm, still controlled. But there was something underneath it now, something quieter, something harder to read. They ask for what is safe. I tightened my grip on the tray slightly, grounding myself in something solid. Maybe I am not most people, I replied before I could stop myself. It was a risk. I knew that the second the words left my mouth. The men around him shifted slightly, not speaking, but noticing, and I became aware again of how out of place I was here, how easily this could turn into something I could not control. But Alexander did not react the way I expected. If anything, his attention sharpened, like I had just confirmed something he had already begun to suspect. No, he said quietly. You are not. The way he said it did not feel like a compliment. It felt like a conclusion, a decision being made in real time. I felt a flicker of unease move through me, subtle but undeniable. This was no longer just a conversation. It had become something else, something that carried weight beyond the words themselves. I should get back to work, I said, finally stepping back, forcing movement into my legs before I could second-guess it. It was the right thing to do, the safe thing. Distance felt necessary now, like the only way to regain control of something that had already begun to slip. He did not stop me. That was what made it worse. No command, no insistence, just a slight tilt of his head, like he was allowing it, like he was choosing to let me go for now. Of course, he said. But then, just as I turned, he added, Lena, my name. It hit me like a small shock, enough to make me pause mid-step. Slowly, I turned back, my heartbeat suddenly louder than the music again. I do not remember introducing myself, I said carefully. His gaze did not waver. You did not, he replied. No explanation, no apology, just certainty. A quiet reminder that he knew things he did not need to be told. A faint chill ran through me, not fear exactly, but something close to it, something that made the edges of this moment feel sharper than they should have been. Good night, Mr. Romano, I said, keeping my voice steady, choosing formality like it could create a boundary that did not actually exist. His eyes held mine for one last second, and then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Good night, he said. I walked away then, this time without hesitation, weaving back through the crowd, past the lights and the laughter and the illusion of normalcy that had felt so distant now. But no matter how far I moved, the feeling did not fade. It stayed with me, quiet and persistent, like a thread I could not see but could not break either. And as I reached the edge of the room, I realized something that settled deep in my chest. I had come here to remain invisible, but somehow, without meaning to, I had done the exact opposite. And in a world like his, being seen was not always a good thing. I kept moving because stopping felt like a mistake, like if I stood still for even a second, the weight of everything that had just happened would catch up to me in a way I could not control. The hallway outside the main ballroom was quieter, the music fading into a distant hum, replaced by the softer sounds of footsteps and low conversations from guests stepping away from the crowd. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, adjusting the tray in my hands even though it was already empty, just to give myself something to do. What was that? My coworker whispered as she stepped beside me, her eyes wide with curiosity and something close to disbelief. I shook my head quickly, keeping my voice low. Nothing, I said, though even to me it sounded unconvincing. She raised an eyebrow, glancing back toward the ballroom. That did not look like nothing. I did not respond, because I did not have an answer that made sense. How do you explain a conversation that felt like more than words, like a shift in something you could not name? How do you explain being seen by someone who did not miss anything? Just go back inside, I added, offering a small, dismissive smile that I hoped would end the conversation. After a second, she nodded, though I could tell she was not convinced, and disappeared back through the doors, leaving me alone in the quieter space. For a moment, I just stood there, letting the silence settle around me, trying to steady the rhythm of my thoughts. It should have ended there. A strange interaction, a moment that would fade once the night was over. But something told me it would not. Something about the way he had said my name, like it had always been his to use. I shook the thought away and pushed open the side door that led toward the service area, needing distance, needing something normal. The fluorescent lights in the hallway felt harsher, less forgiving than the warm glow of the ballroom, and for a second I welcomed it. Reality felt easier here. Predictable. Safe. I set the tray down on the counter and reached for a glass of water, my fingers brushing the cool surface as I tried to focus on something simple, something real. You should not disappear like that. The voice came from behind me, calm, familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten before I even turned around. Slowly, I looked over my shoulder. He should not have been there. Not in this space. Not outside the carefully controlled environment of the ballroom, where everything belonged to him. But he was, standing just inside the doorway, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with certainty. This area is for staff, I said before I could stop myself, the words coming out sharper than intended, more defensive than I had planned. One of his brows lifted slightly, not offended, just noting it. So I have been told, he replied, stepping further inside without hesitation, like rules were simply suggestions he chose to acknowledge or ignore. I straightened instinctively, my pulse picking up again, the sense of control I had tried to regain slipping just a little. Then you should not be here, I added, quieter now, though I was not sure if I was reminding him or myself. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that I could see the details again, the precision in everything about him, the calm that never seemed forced. And yet, he said, his voice even, here I am. The simplicity of it made something in me falter. Because he was right. Because this was his world, even in places where it should not have been. Why? I asked before I could second-guess the question. It came out softer than I intended, but it was honest. He studied me for a moment, like he was deciding how much to say, or if he should say anything at all. Then, finally, he answered. Because you walked away, he said. Not accusing, not questioning, just stating a fact that somehow carried more meaning than it should have. And in that moment, I realized something I had not understood before. Walking away had not ended anything. It had only made him follow. I did not know what unsettled me more, the fact that he had followed me, or the fact that he said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like my actions had simply led to an inevitable outcome. I held his gaze for a second longer than I should have, searching for something that made sense, something that explained why a man like him would leave a room full of people who clearly mattered just to stand here, in a narrow service hallway, talking to someone who was supposed to be invisible. People walk away all the time, I said finally, my voice quieter now, but steady enough to hold its ground. That does not usually make someone follow them. His expression did not change, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, something thoughtful, like he was weighing my words instead of dismissing them. No, he said. It does not. The silence that followed was not empty. It stretched, deliberate, filled with something I could not quite name, something that made the space between us feel smaller than it actually was. I became aware of everything again, the faint hum of the lights above us, the distant echo of music from the ballroom, the cool surface of the counter behind me where my fingers rested, grounding me in a moment that felt like it was shifting without permission. Then why me? I asked before I could stop myself. It was not a strategic question. It was not careful. It was honest. Too honest. For a brief second, I thought he might not answer, that he would deflect or simply walk away, leaving the question hanging the way powerful people often do. But he did not. He looked at me like he was considering how much truth I could handle, or maybe how much he wanted to give. Because you are not careful with your thoughts, he said. The answer caught me off guard. I frowned slightly, not understanding. That does not make any sense, I replied. His gaze shifted briefly, not away from me, but deeper somehow, like he was looking past the surface of what I had said. Most people filter themselves, he continued. They measure every word. They protect themselves before anyone else has the chance to. I listened, even though part of me wanted to interrupt, to argue, to push back against whatever direction this was going. You did not, he added. You said exactly what you were thinking, without knowing who was listening. I let out a small breath, somewhere between a laugh and something else I could not quite place. And that makes me interesting? I asked, a hint of disbelief slipping through despite my attempt to stay composed. It makes you honest, he said. Then, after a brief pause, he added, and honesty is rare. The way he said it made it sound like something valuable, something dangerous. I shifted my weight slightly, the edge of unease returning, stronger now, threading through everything he said. Or maybe it just makes me careless, I replied. His gaze sharpened slightly at that, like he disagreed but was choosing not to say it directly. There is a difference, he said. Carelessness creates mistakes. Honesty reveals intentions. I did not respond right away, because I was not sure which one I had just shown him, because I was not sure which one he believed. The space between us felt different now, less like a chance encounter and more like something intentional, something that had already taken shape without me realizing it. You should go back, I said after a moment, though my voice lacked the firmness it had before. It sounded more like a suggestion than a boundary. He studied me again, that same quiet intensity, like he was committing something to memory. I will, he said, but he did not move immediately. And for some reason, that mattered more than it should have. Lena, he added, my name softer this time, but no less certain. I looked at him, waiting, even though I was not sure why. Be careful who you decide is real, he said. The words landed differently than anything else he had said so far. Not a warning. Not exactly. More like a truth I had not considered. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving the doorway, disappearing back into the world he belonged to without a second glance. I stayed where I was, my thoughts quieter now, but heavier somehow, because something had shifted again. And this time, it was not just about being seen. It was about being understood in a way I had not expected, and I was not sure if that made things better or worse. For a few seconds after he left, I stayed exactly where I was, like moving too soon would break something I did not fully understand yet, like the moment had not finished unfolding even though he was already gone. The hallway felt quieter than before, but not in a comforting way. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes after something important has been said, even if you are still trying to figure out what it meant. I let out a slow breath and turned back to the counter, reaching for the glass of water I had forgotten, the cool surface grounding me again, reminding me that this was real, that I was still here, still just a girl working a shift that was supposed to be ordinary. You disappeared. Again, my coworker's voice came from behind me, softer this time, more cautious. I glanced over my shoulder and saw her leaning against the doorway, watching me with a look that was no longer just curious, but concerned. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded automatically, even though the answer felt incomplete. I am fine, I said, taking a small sip of water to avoid saying more. She hesitated, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. That is not normal, she said, her eyes flicking briefly toward the direction of the ballroom. People do not just walk into the staff area like that. Not him. I knew who she meant without her saying his name. I set the glass down carefully, buying myself a second to think. Maybe he got lost. I offered, though even I did not believe it. She gave me a look that made it clear she did not either. Men like him do not get lost, she said quietly. I did not respond, because I had already figured that out. Because everything about him felt intentional, measured, like every step he took was exactly where he meant to be. And that included coming here. Just be careful, she added after a moment. her tone shifting slightly, less curious now, more protective. I have heard things. Not details, just enough. I met her eyes then, searching for something more, but she shook her head slightly, like whatever she knew was not something she wanted to say out loud. That alone was enough to make something tighten in my chest. It is just a conversation, I said, more to myself than to her, like saying it out loud could make it true. She did not argue, but she did not agree either. After a second, she nodded and stepped back, leaving me alone again with my thoughts. I stayed there for another moment, staring at nothing in particular, replaying everything he had said, every word, every pause, every look. Be careful who you decide is real. The sentence echoed quietly, settling somewhere deeper than I wanted it to. I pushed myself away from the counter and picked up another tray, forcing my body back into motion before my mind could follow. Work was simple, predictable. It did not ask questions. As I walked back toward the ballroom, the music grew. Louder again, the lights warmer, the illusion of normalcy returning piece by piece. But it felt different now, like I had seen something behind it, like I could not go back to not noticing. I stepped through the doors and immediately felt it again, that subtle shift in the air, that quiet awareness that had nothing to do with sound or movement and everything to do with presence. I did not look for him this time. I did not need to. I could feel it. Somewhere in the room, Alexander Romano was still there. And whether he was watching me or not no longer mattered. Because the truth was, I was already aware of him in a way that made distance meaningless. I moved through the crowd, doing my job, playing my role, but something had changed. Something that could not be undone. And as I set a glass down at another table, my hand steady despite everything else, I realized something that settled quietly but firmly in my chest. This was no longer just his world that I had stepped into by accident. Somehow, without meaning to, I had become part of it. I told myself to focus on the rhythm of the room, the simple repetition of steps that had always kept me grounded, pick up the tray, move through the crowd, set the glass down, offer a polite smile, move on. But the problem was that nothing felt simple anymore, not after everything that had already shifted in ways I could not ignore. Every glance felt heavier, every movement more deliberate, like I was being measured against something I did not understand. I avoided looking in his direction, not because I thought it would change anything, but because I needed a moment, just one moment where I could exist without that awareness pressing against me. It did not last long. "You are new," a voice said from one of the tables near the center of the room, pulling me back into the present. I turned, offering a professional smile to the older woman seated there, her posture elegant, her eyes sharp in a way that suggested she missed very little. "Just filling in tonight," I replied, setting a glass down carefully in front of her. She studied me for a second longer than necessary, her gaze drifting briefly past me, then returning with something quieter, more knowing. "That explains it," she said softly. I hesitated, unsure what she meant, but before I could ask, she added, "You should learn quickly." The words were simple, but the tone was not. There was no threat in it, no warning spoken directly, but something about the way she said it made my chest tighten slightly. "Learn what?" I asked before I could stop myself. She did not answer right away. Instead, she glanced once more toward the far side of the room, and this time, I followed her gaze without meaning to. He was there, standing now, no longer seated, speaking to someone with quiet authority, his presence unchanged, still commanding the space around him without effort. But then, as if he felt it, his attention shifted. His eyes found mine again. Not by accident. Not by chance. Direct. Intentional. Like he had known exactly where I was all along. I looked away first this time, faster than before, turning back to the table with a steadiness I forced into place. "Some things are not meant to be noticed," the woman said quietly, her voice pulling my attention back. "And some people do not like being seen in ways they did not choose." I felt a chill move through me, subtle but undeniable. "I did not mean anything," I said, though I was not sure who I was trying to convince anymore. She gave a small, almost sympathetic smile. "It is never about what you mean," she replied. "It is about what happens after." The words settled into me, heavier than they should have been. I nodded politely, finishing my task at the table, but my thoughts were no longer steady, no longer quiet. Because now it was not just him who had noticed me. It was others too, and that changed things in ways I could not predict. I moved away from the table, my steps controlled, my expression composed, but inside, something was shifting again, something that made the room feel different in a way that was harder to ignore. As I reached the edge of the crowd, I allowed myself one brief glance back, just one. He was still there, still watching. Not openly, not obviously, but enough that I could feel it. And for the first time, I understood something that had not been clear before. This was not just curiosity, not just interest. This was something deliberate, something chosen. And in a world where someone like Alexander Romano made choices carefully, that realization carried more weight than anything he had said so far. I turned away quickly, forcing myself to keep moving, to keep breathing, to keep pretending that everything was still normal. But the truth was, it was not. And as I stepped deeper into the crowd again, the music louder now, the lights brighter, I realized something that settled quietly but firmly into place. I had not just been noticed. I had been selected, and I had no idea what that meant yet. I tried to convince myself that being selected did not mean anything, that it was just a word my mind had chosen because it needed something to hold on to, something to explain the way the night no longer felt random. But the truth was, everything now felt intentional in a way that made it impossible to go back to ignorance. I moved carefully, more aware of every step, every glance, every pause in conversation around me, like I had stepped into a pattern I could not yet see but could definitely feel. The room had not changed, the same music, the same laughter, the same polished conversations, but I had, and that made everything else look different. Lena, my manager called softly as he approached, his tone unusually measured. I turned quickly, straightening instinctively. Yes. He glanced briefly over his shoulder, then back at me, lowering his voice. Table 12 requested you specifically. My stomach tightened slightly. Requested me? I repeated, even though I already knew the answer before he said it. He nodded once, his expression neutral, but his eyes sharper than usual. Just go. Be professional. The slight hesitation before his last word did not go unnoticed. I gave a small nod, steadying my breath as I picked up a fresh tray, even though my hands felt just a little less certain than before. Table 12. I did not need to look to know where it was. I had already memorized its position without meaning to. As I approached, the distance felt longer than it should have, each step measured, deliberate, like I was walking towards something that had already been decided. The conversation at the table quieted slightly as I got closer, not completely, but enough to acknowledge my presence. He was there, exactly where I expected him to be, seated with the same controlled posture, the same composed expression, like nothing about this night had shifted at all. Except it had. Because this time, I was not invisible when I arrived. This time, I was expected. What can I get for you? I asked, my voice steady, professional, exactly the way it was supposed to sound. One of the men began to speak, but Alexander lifted his hand again, the same effortless gesture that redirected the moment without resistance. His eyes moved to me, calm, unreadable, but focused in a way that made everything else fade slightly at the edges. Stay, he said. Just one word. Not loud, not demanding, but final in a way that left no room for misunderstanding. My grip on the tray tightened just slightly before I forced myself to relax. I am working, I replied, keeping my tone respectful, neutral, even though something in me resisted the simplicity of that command. A faint shift touched his expression, not irritation, not amusement, but something closer to interest. So am I, he said. The response was quiet, almost casual, but it carried a meaning I could not fully interpret. I hesitated, aware of the attention at the table, the subtle awareness from the people around us, the way this moment was no longer just between the two of us. It was being observed, measured. I set the tray down carefully, giving myself a reason to remain without directly agreeing. Do you need something specific? I asked, redirecting, trying to regain some control over the situation, even if it was small. He studied me for a moment, like he was considering the question more seriously than it deserved. Then he leaned back slightly, his gaze never leaving mine. Yes, he said. Clarity. The word caught me off guard. I frowned slightly before I could stop myself. About what? I asked. He did not answer immediately. Instead, his eyes moved briefly, not away, but around, acknowledging the space, the people, the setting, before returning. To me with that same quiet certainty. About whether you meant what you said, he replied. The air between us shifted again, heavier now, more defined. I felt the weight of every word I had spoken earlier, every unguarded thought that had somehow led to this moment. I could have deflected. I could have softened it, turned it into something harmless, forgettable. But something in me refused to step back completely. I meant it. I said, my voice softer now but steady. His expression did not change, but the silence that followed felt different. Not empty, confirming. And in that moment, I understood something I had not fully accepted before. This was no longer about curiosity. This was a conversation that was shaping something neither of us had named yet. And somehow, without realizing it, I had just made it real. The moment I said it, I felt it settle between us, not just as an answer, but as a decision, like something invisible had just been confirmed and neither of us could take it back. The noise of the room returned slowly, like a distant wave rolling back in, but it did not feel the same anymore. It felt like background to something more focused, something happening in a much smaller space that only the two of us seemed to occupy. He did not react immediately. That was what made it harder to read. No smile, no surprise, no visible shift in posture. Just that same steady gaze, like he was processing more than just the words I had said. Most people would have changed their answer, he said after a moment, his voice quiet enough that it did not carry beyond the table, but firm enough that it did not need to. I kept my hands still against the edge of the tray, grounding myself in something physical, something predictable. Maybe I am not most people, I replied again, softer this time, not challenging, just stating what had already been established. One of the men at the table shifted slightly, glancing between us, clearly aware that this conversation was no longer ordinary, even if they did not fully understand it. Alexander did not acknowledge them. His attention remained exactly where it had been from the beginning. On me. No, he said again, almost under his breath, like he was confirming it more to himself than to anyone else. Then he leaned forward slightly, not enough to draw attention, but enough to change the dynamic of the moment. Then you should understand the difference between curiosity and consequence, he added. The words landed differently than anything else he had said so far. Not a warning. Not exactly, but close enough that I felt it. I held his gaze, even though part of me wanted to step back, to put distance between us, to return to something safer. I do, I said, though the truth was, I was only beginning to. His eyes searched mine for a second longer, like he was testing that answer, weighing it against something I could not see. Then, unexpectedly, he reached up and loosened his tie slightly, just enough to break the perfect line of his suit, just enough to change the image he had maintained all night. It was a small movement, almost insignificant, but it was not. Not here. Not now. Is this what you meant? He asked quietly. The question caught me off guard in a way nothing else had. My breath stilled for a fraction of a second, my mind struggling to keep up with the shift, the sudden, deliberate breaking of the very thing I had commented on earlier. It was not dramatic. It was not exaggerated. But it was real. And that was the point. I swallowed, my voice slower when I answered this time. It is closer, I admitted. Something in his expression changed then, subtle but undeniable, like I had just confirmed something he had been testing from the start. Not satisfaction. Not exactly. But recognition. Careful, he said again, softer now. Almost like a reminder instead of a warning. You might start seeing things you cannot unsee. The words settled into me, heavier than before, carrying more meaning now that the distance between us had shifted. I glanced briefly at the others at the table, aware again of where I was, of the fact that this was not private, even if it felt like it. I should go, I said, my voice quieter now, less certain than before, because leaving no longer felt like a simple action. It felt like stepping away from something unfinished. He leaned back again, the small shift restoring the distance, the control, the version of him that belonged to this world. You can, he said, not stopping me, not holding me there, but not dismissing me either, just allowing the choice to exist. I picked up the tray again, my movements steady out of habit more than confidence, and stepped back from the table. But before I could turn fully away, he added one more thing, his voice low, controlled, meant only for me. But you will not. I paused, just for a second, because something in the way he said it did not feel like a prediction. It felt like certainty. And that was the moment I realized this was no longer about whether I could walk away. It was about whether I wanted to. And I was not sure which answer was more dangerous. I should have walked away the second he said it. The second that quiet certainty settled into the space between us like something already decided, but my feet did not move. Not right away. And that hesitation told me more than anything else could have. Because he was right. Not about everything. Not yet, but about that one thing. I did not want to leave. I turned slowly, just enough to face him again, even though I knew that was the exact opposite of what I should have done. The room felt louder now, the conversations around us sharper, but they still did not reach this space, this moment that seemed to exist just outside of everything else. You seem very sure of that, I said, keeping my voice low, controlled, even though something inside me felt less certain than before. His gaze did not shift, did not soften, but there was something new there, something quieter, like he had been waiting for that exact response. I am, he said simply. No explanation, no elaboration, just certainty. I exhaled slowly, setting the tray back down on the table, not because I needed to, but because it gave me an excuse to stay a second longer without admitting that I was choosing to. You do not know me, I added, not as a challenge this time, but as a reminder, to him or to myself, I was not sure. A faint pause followed, the kind that felt deliberate. Then he spoke again. I know enough, he said. The words should have sounded presumptuous. They should have irritated me, but they did not. Instead, they settled somewhere deeper, somewhere I did not want to examine too closely. You know what I said? I corrected quietly. That is not the same thing. His eyes held mine, steady, unchanging, like he was considering the difference I was trying to create. It is when people say what they are not supposed to, he replied. The answer caught me off guard again, not because it was unexpected, but because it felt like it was pointing at something I had not fully acknowledged. I hesitated, then shook my head slightly. Or maybe it just means I made a mistake, I said. There it was again. That word. Mistake. Something in his expression shifted at that, sharper this time, more defined, like he disagreed more strongly than before. You keep calling it that, he said. Why? The question landed differently than the others. It was not about the situation anymore. It was about me. I opened my mouth, then paused, realizing I did not have a simple answer. Because calling it a mistake made it easier, made it smaller, made it something I could dismiss once the night was over. Because it would be easier if it was. I admitted finally, my voice quieter now, more honest than I had intended. The truth hung there between us, fragile and unguarded. For a second, neither of us spoke. And then, something changed again. Not in the room, not in the people around us. In him. It was subtle, almost impossible to define, but it was there. A shift away from control, just for a moment, just enough to feel real. Easier is not always better, he said. Softer now. Not a statement of power, a statement of experience. I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear, not exactly, but something close to understanding, like I was beginning to see a version of him that did not fit the image I had built in my head. And what is better? I asked before I could stop myself. His gaze held mine for a second longer, deeper this time, like the answer mattered more than the question. Truth, he said. Just one word. But it landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. I swallowed, my thoughts shifting again, my sense of distance from this moment slipping further away. Because the truth was, I had not expected this. I had not expected him to meet me here, in this space between curiosity and something more complicated. I had not expected him to answer in a way that felt less like control and more like something real. And that was the most dangerous part of all. Because it made me want to stay. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. And that choice, quiet as it was, changed everything. The word stayed with me longer than anything else he had said. Truth, simple and clean, but heavy in a way that made everything around it feel less certain, like once you accepted it, you could not go back to easier versions of things. I looked at him for a second longer than I should have, trying to understand what he meant by it, trying to decide if he believed it or if it was just another way of controlling the moment. But there was nothing in his expression that felt calculated now, nothing that felt like performance. That was what unsettled me the most. Truth is not always safe, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt, because something in me needed to push back, needed to hold on to some sense of balance before everything tilted too far in one direction. His gaze did not waver. Neither is pretending, he replied. The answer came without hesitation, like he had already considered every angle of that argument long before I had said it. I let out a slow breath, my thoughts shifting again, moving away from what I expected this to be and towards something I did not recognize yet. You talk like there is only one choice, I said. Like everything is either real or not. A faint pause followed, just long enough to feel intentional. Then he shook his head slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to change the direction of the moment again. No, he said. There are always choices. His voice softened just a fraction, not losing its control, but gaining something else, something closer to honesty. Most people just do not like the cost of them. The words settled into me slowly, like they needed time to take shape, to mean what they were meant to mean. I glanced down at my hands for a second, at the edge of the tray, at the simple reality of what I was supposed to be doing, and how far I had drifted from it without even noticing. And what is the cost here? I asked, not sure if I wanted the answer, but needing to hear it anyway. He did not respond immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his posture returning to that composed stillness, like he was placing distance back between us, but not enough to undo what had already happened. That depends on how much you are willing to see, he said finally. I frowned slightly, the answer vague in a way that felt intentional, like he was giving me just enough without taking responsibility for what it might mean. That is not really an answer, I replied. His expression shifted again, just slightly, something almost like acknowledgement. It is the only one you will get tonight, he said. The finality in his tone was different this time. Not controlling, not dismissive, just decided. I felt the moment start to close, not abruptly, but naturally, like whatever this was had reached a point it could not move past, at least not here, not now. The room around us seemed to return fully then, the conversations louder, the movement more noticeable, the space no longer just ours. I picked up the tray again, my fingers steady, my posture falling back into the role I was supposed to play, even though something inside me no longer fit as easily into it. I should go, I said, and this time it felt more real, more necessary, not just an escape, but a boundary I needed to hold on to. He nodded once, a small, controlled movement, but it carried a different kind of weight now, less like permission and more like acknowledgement. You should, he agreed. I hesitated for half a second, then turned, stepping away from the table, from him, from the space that had shifted too many times in ways I could not fully process. But as I moved through the crowd again, the music louder, the lights brighter, the world returning to something that looked normal from the outside, I realized something that made it impossible to pretend everything was the same. This was not over. Not because he would not let it be, but because I would not forget it. And as I reached the edge of the room, my steps slowing just slightly, I understood something that settled deep and quiet inside me. Truth was not just something you heard. It was something you chose to carry. And I had just taken my first step into it. I thought distance would fix it, that stepping away would return everything to something familiar, something manageable. But the truth was, distance only made it clearer how much had already changed. I moved through the rest of the night like I was following a script I had known for years, smiling when expected, serving without mistakes, blending back into the rhythm that had always kept me invisible. But invisibility was gone now. Not because people were staring, not because anything obvious had shifted, but because I knew. And once you know, you cannot unknow. The hours passed, slower than usual, each minute stretching just enough to remind me that something was waiting on the other side of it, something unfinished. I avoided looking toward his table again, not out of fear, but because I did not need confirmation. I already felt it. That quiet awareness, steady and constant, like a presence that did not need to announce itself. When the event finally began to wind down, the room softened, conversations loosening, people drifting toward exits, the tension of formality slowly dissolving into something more relaxed. I carried my last tray back toward the service area, my steps lighter, but my thoughts heavier than when the night had begun. You survived, my coworker said with a small smile as she passed me, her tone half teasing, half relieved. I nodded, returning the smile, though it felt different now, like it belonged to a version of me from earlier in the evening. Barely, I replied softly. She laughed, then disappeared down the hallway. leaving me alone again in that quiet space where everything seemed clearer than it did out in the lights. I set the tray down and leaned lightly against the counter, letting the silence settle around me one last time, letting the night replay itself in fragments I could not quite put together into something simple. I should have left then, changed, clocked out, gone home, and let it all fade into something that felt like a strange memory. But something kept me there, just for a moment longer, like I was waiting without admitting it. And then I heard it. Not loud, not dramatic, just the sound of the door opening behind me. I did not turn right away. I did not need to. I already knew. You stayed, his voice said, calm, steady, exactly the same as before, but carrying something different now, something quieter, something more certain. I let out a slow breath before turning to face him, my expression composed, even though something inside me had already shifted in response. So did you, I replied. He stepped further into the room, closing the distance in a way that felt deliberate but not forced, like this moment had been building towards something neither of us had named yet. I said you would, he said simply. Not pride, not challenge, just confirmation. I studied him for a second, taking in the details again. The way his suit was still perfect, except for that one small change, the loosened tie, the subtle break in the image that had started everything. You seem to be right about a lot of things, I said quietly. A faint pause followed, then the slightest shift in his expression, something almost like acknowledgement. Only about the things I choose to be, he replied. The answer was not arrogant. It was precise, and somehow, that made it more real. I crossed my arms lightly, not defensive, just grounding myself in the moment, in the choice I was still making by being here. And what is it that you are choosing now? I asked. The question hung between us, heavier than anything else I had said so far. Because this was not about curiosity anymore. This was about intention. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me in a way that felt different from before, less like observation and more like decision. Then, finally, he spoke. To see what happens when you stop pretending you do not belong here, he said. The words landed deeper than I expected, not because they were surprising, but because they challenged something I had held onto for a long time. I shook my head slightly, a quiet reflex. I do. Not belong here, I said. His gaze did not waver. That depends on what you define as here, he replied. I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped, because I realized I did not have a clear answer. Not anymore. The silence stretched for a moment, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt like space, like something waiting to be filled with a choice I had not fully made yet. And then, slowly, I understood something I had been avoiding since the beginning of the night. This was never just about him. It was about me. About whether I was willing to step into something unknown, something uncertain, something that did not fit the safe version of the world I had always stayed in. I met his gaze again, steady this time, not because I had all the answers, but because I had finally stopped pretending I did not have a choice. And in that moment, quiet and unspoken, I made